managing emotions and navigating frustrations is really about the modulating our stress response and helping our kids to do the same across the domains of their lives and helping them to use their strengths to navigate those challenges in a way that makes sense for them.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Shafer, your host of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm so glad you're here. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about helping others reclaim their stories so that they can build their most beautiful future. And also having guests on the show that share their own experiences doing just that, and the beautiful systems, programs, and lives that they are building that not only help themselves, but also help others reclaim their stories and live their most beautiful and healthy lives. Dr. Kate Lund, our guest today, is someone who has done just that. Dr. Kate Lund is the host of the Optimized Mind podcast, the best-selling author of Bounce, Help Your Child Build Resilience and Thrive in School, Sports, and Life, and her new book, Step Away, The Keys to Resilient Parenting, which just released October 2025. Dr. Lund helps us face the struggles parents are navigating and incorporate habits for healthy connection with our kids. A TEDx speaker, Dr. Lund is an expert at translating science-based methods into parenting skills that you and I can use in our daily lives. Dr. Lund, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
I'm so excited for all of the advice and guidance that you will share with us today. I know I've listened to your TED Talks and your other interviews, as well as your podcast, and I am so inspired by the way that you give really actionable advice for parents, because it can be really easy in daily life to get stuck in reactivity, emotions, all the things that we need to do. And we need to learn how to take a step back so we're showing up in the way that we not only need to for our kids, but that we truly want to. Taking a step back in your story, what inspired you to become a clinical psychologist?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it goes back to my childhood, really. When I was 4, I was diagnosed with a medical condition called hydrocephalus. And essentially, I'm sure you know that what that is, but maybe the listeners, when pressure builds up on the brain because the cerebral spinal fluid isn't circulating as it should. And, I was a typical happy 4-year-old. And then all of a sudden I got really sick. Horrible headaches, particularly in the middle of the night, throwing up all the time. And the imaging back in the mid 1970s wasn't amazing. So it took a while for the doctors to figure out exactly what was going on. It was a really difficult time for my parents, everybody really. And finally, they figured it out. And shunts were relatively in their infancy. A shunt is what manages hydrocephalus, circulates the CSF, the cerebral spinal fluid, for one when it can't circulate on its own. So I had a shunt put in, and that was great because shunts really manage the condition well until they break. And so a large portion of my childhood was spent in and out of the hospital, coming back to school, looking different, feeling different, half a head of hair and giant glasses and things like that. And so I had to figure out, along with the support of my family, my teachers, parents of friends, that sort of thing, how to focus on what I could do as opposed to what I couldn't do, and how to really move forward from that point. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a process. But that really, I believe, is the foundation for why I took the path that I did through school, beyond, and why I'm doing the work I do now as a psychologist, helping families to build resilience, maximize their potential within their own unique context. Because that's the thing, all our contexts are different, right? And we're all coming from such different places, different experiences, different angles. And how do we make the most of that without comparing ourselves to others?
Yeah, it really brings to mind your TED Talk about finding the ordinary and the extraordinary. And I think it's interesting because when you are holding that concept in your mind, It's so simple to say, but it is so complex to do. And it's different for every single person. When I think of you with your hydrocephalus as a child, when you said I had a headache or you felt you had a headache, that could be a warning sign. That could be the start of a cascade into events that you've been down that road before. It was going to affect school life. It could be scary. It could affect your vision, etc. Like it could be really scary. Whereas another child could have a headache because they didn't drink enough water. And you could have that same kind of headache. And it just makes me think of, how do you learn to navigate your extraordinary circumstances? Because we all have them, while living an ordinary life and embracing that feeling of, I'm normal, I belong.
Yeah, that is such a great question, a powerful question, really. And no easy answers there, right? I mean, it was a process. I would argue a process that, goes on to this day, right? You have to kind of look at things a little bit differently when there's been that kind of a history. So it's really understanding yourself to the point where, okay, well, what's normal or typical for me in this kind of a situation with a headache or what have you? So that wasn't always easy as a kid. And there were some points where, because the imaging wasn't great and it wasn't always clear what was happening, um, where that headache was seen by the doctors, by my parents, as just a headache, but then it really wasn't. So there were some really dicey situations that came up. Nobody's fault, it just was, because the hydrocephalus became kind of complex at points. First treated at 4 and then on, and then some complexities came up at 10 and then beyond. So there's no easy answer for that question, but it's a question of building awareness over time, managing, the health anxiety that can pop up in those types of situations. And it did, right? And you try to compartmentalize, move forward while integrating. So it was a process, but ultimately I was really fortunate because I had these folks behind me in my corner who really helped me to focus on what I could do as opposed to the things I couldn't do. And sure, the things I couldn't do were a big bummer, but the challenges were real. But focusing on what I could do and how I could perhaps use my strengths to move forward was, I think, a huge deal for me and really did help me move forward in a way that was meaningful.
Yeah. And the thing that comes to my mind when you speak on that important point is it translates into all of our lives, not just the big moments. Like you said, those really, potentially life or death or disabling decisions, right? Like, we need to get the pressure off the brain. And, maybe this one's just a headache. And even now with better imaging, people who have hydrocephalus, this is an ongoing juggling and investigative act for them. It's something that in those extraordinary moments you're navigating. Also, in the ordinary moments, we're also navigating the same things. And when we can learn those skills to help them navigate them instead of getting sucked into what I think of as a tornado of emotions that's just spinning and it's destructive and it's not going anywhere good or doing anything helpful for us, how can you help parents and through their modeling help children learn how to not get sucked into that whirlwind of expectations and shame, all of these emotions that are destructive, guilt, and instead really build that resilience to embrace those challenging moments?
Yeah, that's another really, really good question. And, the first thing that I work with virtually everybody on is helping them to build a level foundation where their stress response is consistently modulated. So even. Because if we're starting the day up here and then a challenge hits or something that we're stressed out about or causes anxiety hits, we could escalate to the point of shutdown. And then we're stuck in that space of not really being able to move forward. And so I teach folks a very simple technique derived from something developed by a physician in the 1970s in Boston named Herbert Benson. And this is called the relaxation response. Really well researched technique. And what I teach is derived from that directly. Help folks come up with a word or a phrase that they find soothing in some way. Super simple. And they just breathe. But that word or that phrase is kind of like a placeholder. And it's helping them to modulate their stress response, kind of build this even foundation with consistent practice that becomes integrated into kind of their baseline. So the technique is also so simple that we can carry it around kind of in our back pocket, such that if a moment of stress comes up or we're waiting on a difficult conversation, or I use it a lot with young athletes who are going into a stressful game type situation, you can kind of reset and kind of level the foundation or playing field, no pun intended, before moving into that stressful situation. So that's the first thing that's really, really important that we can help people develop.
I love that. Our family, so when my children were younger and dealing with stress, because they definitely had this fear of failure, and they would go into a shame spiral when they felt that they'd made even the tiniest little mistake. And it was really hard to get them out because the deep breathing exercises didn't really resonate with them. And I think from uh, one perspective, I wonder if they were already a little too far into that cascade.
Yeah.
So they are already neurochemically at a point where they couldn't regulate their breathing. But bringing it back to the body is still helpful. And so one of the things that we would do as a family, that we still do, we did it. It wasn't yesterday. I think it was the day before, when there was a little squabble between the children and we needed to re-regulate, and we've trained them to, when we don't want to do breathing, we do a reset, and we just do reset. And every single person in the family, and I think that's an important part of it too, because we're acknowledging, like, we're all part of the problem. We're all a part of this. Everyone gets a bop on the nose, like a gentle little boop, boop, boop. And we say, reset. You want to be reset? And then they say, yes, I want to be reset. And everyone gets reset. And then it's a permission to let it go. We don't even have to resolve it. Sometimes we just need to move on. And then when we're calm, we can come back to, if there was an underlying issue that we need to address, we can come back to it.
Of that. And that's exactly, you make another good point, because the breathing piece doesn't work for everybody, right? Or they just have trouble kind of getting into that mode. So all of this is not a one size fits all, and it's finding that strategy that works for you or for your family. And I absolutely love the one that you're describing, because you're sort of acknowledging, yes, a reset, and you've got that physical piece going on, which I often recommend, particularly to my athletes who are trying to reset on the field, whether that's snapping their wristband or what have you. But I love that. And that's the point, right? Finding a way or a strategy to level that foundation, modulate that stress response that works for you. And that's the key point, right?
Absolutely. What do we do? So I think we've been kind of discussing a situation where we're helping our children modulate, just in general, even when our emotions are getting big, right? So I want to talk about, what do we do when, okay, yes, my emotions are big, I've modulated my emotion, but my child has genuinely made a mistake that I need to do some parenting, some teaching around this mistake, but maybe it hasn't been modeled for me the way to address that in a, what I like to call it, as a connecting over correcting method, right? So how can I make sure that I feel that I'm showing up as a parent and I'm teaching and modeling this for my child, not just, some people would say letting it go, right? It's something I really feel I need to address, but also make sure that I'm connecting with them in that moment rather than just focusing on things like shame, blame, and correction.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And so it's that authentic human connection between us as parents and our kids, which is so powerful, particularly in those moments where they've made a mistake. or where it's necessary for us to intervene on a parental level and help them sort of course correct or move in a different direction. But I really believe that this idea of sharing with our kids in developmentally appropriate ways the points where we've struggled, the places where we've made mistakes, and how we've bounced back, or just that it's possible to bounce back because, we don't want to have our kids think that we're giving them a roadmap for how they have to do it. But just that understanding, that awareness that, oh, wow, mom's made mistakes too. Things have been hard as a result of those mistakes for mom in moments. And really giving them that idea through that authentic human connection and conversation is so vital.
I love that. It makes me think of a game that we play as a family. We play this game. My daughter actually brought it. She's 11, almost 12, middle school age, right? So they're learning all sorts of social things at this age.
Yeah.
And oh, yeah, they're learning all sorts of things. The beginning of the school year has been really fascinating, her first foray into this school setting. And one of the games that she has wanted to play lately is Never Have I Ever. And the way she taught us to play the game is, you, the person who is asking the question, never have I ever, you say something you've never done. But then everyone else around the table, if they have in fact done that, they have to put their hand up and explain what they did, what they learned from it. And I love this game because when we play this game as parents, it does give us a authentic way to share these stories where it doesn't feel like we're on our soapbox saying, well, when I was a kid, and they kind of don't necessarily always respond to it the way we're hoping. Or maybe we feel really awkward sharing that story when we just off the cuff say it because we're worried about something that's going on at school with their friends, etc. Whereas when we say it in a game, share it that way, it's an easy, vulnerable way for us to share. And also they're so relaxed, they can actually hear us and hopefully take those little bits of, oh gosh, I made this big mistake. And I really wish I didn't do it. I got away with it, but man, I wish I hadn't done that when I was a kid.
Yeah, 100%. It's that human way of sharing, right? That through the game. And so yeah, I think kind of really understanding ourselves and our kids to figure out what is the best way to create those connections, right? To share these bits of information. And you're exactly right, because we never want to come across as we're on a soapbox, like, well, that happened to me and you should do that. No, no, no. That's not the way at all. But you know, different social issues that maybe came up for one of my boys in those early middle school years that were hard, kind of talking through what that experience was like with him worked really well for us. He was pretty socially, emotionally evolved at that point. And then kind of sharing some of my struggles in, feeling like I didn't fit in, or, you know, things were hard. It was hard to connect, or, feeling different in some way at points. And so that worked here in that scenario, would not have worked as well with his twin brother, who developmentally was in sort of a different space in those earlier years. So make such a good point, because it's finding that way to connect that fits who and where your child is in time and space, and fits us as parents.
Yeah. And then when you have other children, it can get more complicated. So if you do have children that are neurodevelopmentally divergent from one another, whether it's because of age difference or just simply a disability they may have or a condition they may have, whatever it is, and there's a significant difference between their ability to understand, I'm packaging this way. I read this parenting book and this is how they said I should package this. And I packaged it at the dinner table. I felt like I knocked it out of the park, and one of my kids got it and the other one didn't, right? So when we have those experiences as parents and we're like, man, I'm doing everything right, what's going on? What are some ways we as parents can approach that to try to make sure? It can be so hard. It makes me think of even just a school setting of one class of kids, one class of 20 kids, they're not all going to learn the same way. How do we meet all of their needs? So is there a way that can help parents feel less guilt? Because I do think that there is guilt in that when you're trying to meet everyone's needs and juggle everything. And sometimes it feels a bit impossible as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. It does. It can feel that way. And I think the most important piece is really understanding your kids in their as individuals and recognizing that all our kids are going to be different regardless of age differences or what have you. I mean, I have twins, twin boys. They're 18 now, and they're very different kids. And they have been very different kids over time. And so it's been a question of really understanding each boy in their own unique context and helping them to flourish in that context. And the paths have looked quite different for each of them. And they're both on the right path for them, right? And so I think understanding that piece, that all our kids are going to be different, and then that there's really no one size fits all in terms of how we're approaching them. It's meeting them where they are within their own unique context and moving forward from there. That's really, what I believe, what I work with folks, in my practice on, and what I've lived myself.
And looking at when you're trying to help them learn from mistakes, from failures, from life's lessons, you're not teaching them to not fail in the future. Quite the opposite. You're teaching them how to, going back to your first book, how to bounce, how to
Exactly.
become resilient. Tell me about what inspired you to write the book and what are some big takeaways and some reasons why our listeners who are with us today may think, oh, you know what, I'm going to add that to my parenting shelf because I think there are some nuggets here for me that'll help me and my family.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason I wrote Bounce, honestly, was I wrote it back in 2017, and my boys were in second grade at the time. And I was observing all of the sort of social challenges, other challenges that were popping up. And then I was seeing a lot of parallel process in the families I was working with. And so I was like, I am going to write this book and kind of outline the 7 pillars of the resilient child as they're showing up, both in my observations of my boys and their friends in the classroom, as well as the folks I'm working with. And then, of course, there were elements of that from my own childhood experience as well that were kind of popping into my mind as I wrote the book. And so, the 7 pillars are outlined. First one is managing emotions and navigating frustrations is really about the modulating our stress response and helping our kids to do the same across the domains of their lives. And then, we look at friendship, navigating friendship and social pressure. And that really came up. One of my boys is, he always has been kind of socially, emotionally evolved beyond his years. So when he was 7, 8, he wanted to understand kind of why the boys were saying mean things to him, why they were shoving him in the mud because he was wearing the wrong football jersey, the wrong team. We're in Seattle and they wanted to see the Seahawks, but he had the 49ers on and it didn't go well. But why were those things happening? Whereas his brother was much more in the place of, hey, I'm happy as long as I have the football. Let's go. And so it's very, very different. And the place where a lot of the boys I was observing in the class were, they just wanted the football and they wanted to play. They didn't really care about what was happening beneath the surface of why certain things were being said. So that was a challenge that we had to work through here. And it was difficult at times. So that was one of the reasons that pillar came forth in the book. It was the second pillar. And then, some of the takeaways that come forth is the importance of having courage to take that first step forward and not be afraid to fail. Being able to see the possibility on the other side of the very real challenges that we all are going to face. and helping our kids internalize that reality early and helping them to use their strengths to navigate those challenges in a way that makes sense for them. And, that's really kind of where it wraps up with my last pillar, which is how do we help kids develop that sense of optimism, that sense, that ability to see possibility on the other side of challenge? So that's kind of the book in a nutshell. I mean, there's more, but that's really kind of the main crux of what I hope folks will take away. The other cool thing is all the pillars apply to all of us across the lifespan. It's just written through that lens of the elementary school child.
Well, I love that. And I think that's a great place to access people. I think that's why children's books are so powerful. I think that's why parenting advice is so powerful. And we listen to these things and they impact how we parent, but I think they also impact tremendously how we self-regulate and self-parent. And then that rolls, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And I love this permission. It really makes me envision when we really, really fully embrace, and it takes time and forming a new habit to do so. But when we fully embrace the idea that our failures can be fantastic and they can be learning opportunities, right? And building blocks for this future that we're building. And we, instead of imagining ourselves the way that I think modern society has made us picture ourselves, which is the White House, white picket fence, the two kids, the dog, everything just perfect, make it perfect, keeping up with the Joneses, all of those ideas of what we should be, should. What a bad setup for happiness, right? Happiness is probably not attainable in that setup. And instead, we imagine ourselves as this mad scientist that's like, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that means that's exciting because that means, or this part of the experiment worked. So that means, so instead of focusing on the failure as a negative, focusing on it as a building block for the next step and building the life, building the experience that you really want for yourself or with your children, with your business. How do we build on it instead of letting our mistakes break us down? So I love how you work and you, again, you make them pillars, right? We're building something, we're building a foundation.
Exactly. That's spot on. We want to build that foundation and we want to not be afraid of our mistakes or the places where we didn't succeed, but kind of reframe those as, okay, so that didn't work the way I was hoping. How can we shift gears on that and build forward from this point? And such an important principle to help our kids to integrate. So to model for our kids and also to talk to our kids about in that developmentally appropriate way, as we're connecting with them authentically.
So when we reflect, and again, we look at them from a mad scientist
Yeah.
standpoint, right? We're like, okay, man, what are my experiments? And thinking about parenting as a grand experiment, because it really is.
Yes.
What are the experiments that I did in my life that failed miserably, that then I had to pick up the pieces, go back, see what went wrong, and then conduct a new experiment? Are there any just glorious mistakes or mishaps that you think you had parenting your children that really contributed then to the book or to your clinical practice? Because you thought, man, even I, as a clinical psychologist, right, I know what I'm doing. But a humanizing moment, none of us, no one comes with a blueprint. We don't really know. We're always learning, right? Everything is a new experiment, a new person. We do the best we can with the tools we have. So are there any grand moments that you reflect back on, you think, man, that was a life-changing mistake that while maybe it would have been more comfortable if it didn't happen, I'm glad it did because we learned so much as a family.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know. So kind of life changing, sort of monumental. I'm sure they're there. They're not coming to mind as we speak, but one kind of amusing moment where I kind of look back and I'm like, well, that wasn't, I mean, you definitely knew better there, was around when my boys were 7. Um, I somehow thought that they had what it took to self-regulate with their screen time. So I saw screen time sort of taking off like a snowball, going in the wrong direction. And I was like, all right, guys, we'll just, come on, we gotta get this, we gotta scale this back. We gotta, cut back. And so somehow I expected without the scaffolding that would happen. And so clearly obvious that it wasn't going to happen. And so it took a bit I was like, oh, okay, all right, we gotta put a scaffolding in place here. And, that whole piece, had to come into focus, and it kind of did over time. I mean, I often wonder, what it would be like if things were a little more regulated now at 18 than they are. Like, both of them are dialed in, both of them are doing fine, but I do see their faces in YouTube way too much. And I'm kind of like, I wonder what else would be possible for you two if there wasn't quite so much time on YouTube.
Mm.
But it was that moment at 7 where I was like, okay, I have to recalibrate in terms of how I'm approaching this, because at 7, and I know this, right? I know this from all of the everything, that 7-year-olds are not going to self-regulate with something, particularly like a screen, that's so enticing. But somehow my mom brain forgot that in that moment.
Yeah. Well, I think it can be hard when you know your child as an individual, because in so many ways they really shock you with how evolved they are. And you're like, wow, you're so grown up. You can do this or you can do that. But then sometimes when we see someone else, like we see someone else's child walking home alone when they're 6, or walking home with an 8-year-old sibling, and we're thinking, oh no. Because, the mom brain kicks in and you're thinking of all, like, if it goes fine, it's fine. But if it doesn't go fine, right? Like if somebody's ball rolls into the road, or a cat runs into the road and the 8-year-old decides they want to save it, and then the 6-year-old's running too, you're thinking, if everything goes fine, it's fine. And if it doesn't, it doesn't, right? You're trying to, you have these moments. I have these moments as a mom where I think sometimes you have a different clarity or perspective when you're outside looking in than you do when you're with this person, and you see them and all of their potential, and it's easy to think they can do things that they can't. One thing I wanted to add, and I'd be very curious to hear your perspective on this, that I have navigated throughout my kids' lives, because they're both very different, as you said, right? You have one and you think, oh, I'm going to have another because I'll be just like this amazing human being. And then you're like, hey, factory settings are totally different on this one.
Yeah.
What's going on? I thought I knew what was going to happen. You don't.
Yeah.
But you love them. You love them for their unique individuality, but don't expect to, even when they're twins, like Dr. Lund has, don't expect them to be the same human being. And so something that I've experienced is, your child really well. And I homeschooled my daughter during the pandemic, as many parents did, right? You know how your child learns really well. And then they go back to an outside of the home learning situation, or even if they were never homeschooled, they're at school and their teachers are telling them, you need to do this because at your age, kids should be able to do this. And as their parent, that rigidity, that they can't meet that, right? They're not able to be as quote unquote responsible. They can't manage their time that way, or they can't manage their items that way. They forget things, and it's not that they're irresponsible or that they don't care. It's just that they have proven time and time again that they are not capable of managing their items. They're not. They need to co-regulate that skill. They haven't mastered it yet. And it can be hard to advocate for or speak up for your child when you maybe aren't in a super healed place, right? And you feel that the teacher or this, again, this is not against teachers. I love teachers so, so much. And I think they're amazing, everything they do every day. When your child is having to meet these expectations that are kind of rigid because, at this age, they should be able to do that, it can be frustrating as a parent. You may want to speak up, but you may also feel kind of that you're not allowed to. Have you seen this in your practice? And what are ways to help parents advocate for their kids if, again, they know, hey, my child isn't neurodevelopmentally ready for this task? Their 4th grade or 5th grade teachers saying, to move on to the next year, you have to have this skill, even though it's really not a make or break it. And next year, they're probably going to be there just by nature's course. They'll have developed there. What are good ways to have that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's important to have that conversation with the teacher, sort of in an authentic way, trying to connect with the teacher on a human level with the understanding that the teacher might respond or they might not. And so there's not much you can do at that point. But then it's important to have the conversation with your child in, again, a developmentally appropriate way. And, you know, explain to them that, hey, it's okay. Like, I understand where you are and you're going to be moving towards X, Y, or Z, that thing that your teacher is telling you each and every day that you have to master. And try to help your child understand that it's okay where they are and they're going to move forward. And their teacher might just not be in a space to see that or whatever. And the flexibility, we hope that the teacher is going to be able to demonstrate flexibility in their thinking, but not always the case. I mean, an example would be my own son in fourth grade had a very rigid teacher. Um, you know, Lovely woman on many levels, but very rigid in terms of what the kids had to be doing at each moment in fourth grade. And my son just wasn't there. He was not there. And he got a lot of negative reinforcement from the teacher as a result of that. So I had to kind of step in with him because the teacher wasn't going to change, right? And I understood that. And it was the way it was, just a very narrow view of what the kids had to be. And he wasn't there. And so helping him to understand his own strengths. And yeah, there were challenges. And how can we maybe look at that a little bit differently? But with the understanding that he was evolving, he was going to get to where he needed to be. And he did, wasn't always easy and didn't always feel good to me when said teacher was like, looking at me with a stern sort of unhappy face telling me what all the problems were. But he wasn't acting out. It wasn't a behavioral issue. It was an academic type of thing, right? Where he wasn't engaged in the poetry lessons the way he was expected to be. And it's evolved. And so it's a balance that has to be struck between us as parents communicating with our children and the teachers, and just really helping them to appreciate their own context and their strengths and how they can use those to move forward to the places that are challenging. And then, frankly, tuning out perhaps part of what the teacher is trying to communicate about what's wrong with our child, because we do know our child best and how they learn and how they're gonna move forward. And not tuning them out, not tuning the teacher out in a disrespectful way, but just in a way that's going to help our child.
It's so complex, but realistically, in all of our relationships, I think there's something to be said for just teaching kids at a young age that it's okay that sometimes we disagree, right? And we can have grace for that. Um, we always have to be respectful, even if we disagree with someone. These are all fundamental skills for community and society. And we won't learn them if everything is just peachy keen all the time and everyone's just happy and there's no conflict.
Right. If everything's just smooth and easygoing, right, we're not going to learn those vital skills. Like, okay, well, it's okay to disagree, but we need to do that in a respectful way where everybody's voice and opinion is heard. And how is it possible to do that? And so, such an important message to help our kids integrate early.
Talking about resilience and learning how to bounce, right? And how to go from, like imagining this ball in the basketball court. Okay, like sometimes I'm up in the air and then sometimes I'm over here. And how do I navigate it all? Moving from your first book to now your new book, what are some of the main takeaways for readers? Why were you so excited to share these lessons with the world in this time?
Yeah, so super excited about this project. And the book came about because, and I felt this myself and I have over time, parents are stressed right now, right? There was that report by the Surgeon General last January, I think, saying that the very, very high percentage of parents is stressed to the point of shutdown. So it's basically the crux of Step Away. It's how can we as parents build resilience in ourselves by taking that pause, by taking time out for ourselves to make our foundation more robust. And so by managing our stress response, it's by, you know, connecting with our kids in authentic ways so we can model what we're doing for them. It's engaging in hobbies or things that bring us joy each and every day because it's something that we can easily overlook. I mean, I overlook it all the time. And it's just so important, though, to have those moments of levity, those moments that spark happiness and joy. It's connecting with our social connections, community, because the power in that is real. And again, something that we often overlook. And so that's basically at the foundation of why I wrote the book. And in the book, we talk about, emotionally intelligent parenting, understanding ourselves, understanding our kids, largely what we just talked about with kind of understanding where our kids are and how to help them flourish in their context. And this book is really about how can we as parents flourish in our own unique context and how will that benefit our kids and our family.
That's such an important thing to highlight, that self-care for yourself as a parent is so vitally important and key to showing up the way you want to. There are moments, my son is the most lovely, fun kiddo in the whole world, and sometimes he has outbursts in public, and sometimes he really wants to be a part of something, but he is also having a really hard time regulating himself within that activity, but he does not want to leave. And so in that moment, I choose to, because it is what I have found to be the most effective with him, co-regulate for him so that he can stay in that space, stay at that event, that movie, whatever it is. Try to make it as little of a distraction for others as possible. It's not a non-distraction, but as little of a distraction as possible so that he can enjoy that activity. But when you need to show up in parenting in that high intensity, if you do that for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours afterwards, you're depleted. You're done. And you need to give yourself the grace to understand that you need to have some system in place so you can replete. Because if you try to push through and keep parenting at that level of intensity, you're going to hit into a temporary burnout and you're not going to show up the way that you wanted to. And all that regulation did before, you're probably not going to remember how great you did with that. You're just going to remember how badly you felt in that moment when maybe you were depleted and you didn't show up the way you wanted to.
100%. Yes. Yeah. And that's why for us as parents, finding a way to modulate our stress response consistently is so important to form the foundation for our ability to show up as we want. But you make a great point in that if you're engaged in a situation that could be potentially depleting for hours on end, then there are extra measures that we have to take. How can we then take a step back after that situation is resolved or stabilized and care for ourselves in a way that's going to help us replenish as opposed to just moving forward to the next thing and the next thing, because that's the point where burnout is really going to set in.
And so schedules, I imagine that can be a really important thing to be mindful of, especially, in the fall and the holiday seasons. We tend to have some FOMO, some fear of missing out, but we may need to have a little bit more fear or factor in of doing simply too much and getting depleted.
100%. Yes. And so really being mindful of where that line is that's going to tip us over the edge as parents and impact our ability to show up as we want, as we'd like to, or where's that line for our kids? And so that's where it comes back to really knowing our kids and knowing their thresholds for when they're going to have too much of something fun or great, that's going to tip them over that edge. So it can be a delicate balance because everybody's threshold tends to be different. So really that awareness for us as parents, it starts with us as parents having that awareness to make sure that those moments of fear of missing out don't take over.
And then when we're examining it, take the mad scientist route and say, okay, this was instead of, oh my gosh, I can't believe, I lost my temper. I was so frustrated because I was so tired and get kind of sucked into the tornado.
Exactly.
Instead, we can say, as a mad scientist, this experiment did not work. What are we going to do next time? Because it's Thanksgiving. This blew up magnificently in our faces. How are we going to approach Hanukkah or Christmas?
100%. And right. So that idea of not beating ourselves up and looking at it like, yeah, this was a mad scientist experiment and it didn't go the way I wanted, but how can I shift gears on that the next time and perhaps move forward with a little bit of a different direction or lens, and let's see how it goes. Because that goes back to that there's no one size fits all, in parenting and in situations.
Absolutely. So moving forward, I think our listeners have learned so much from hearing you speak, not only on your personal experiences, your wonderful professional contributions to the world. And there are so many ways that people can learn more from you and connect with you. Your books, the one that just came out, that's so exciting. You can go and buy those, but also through your podcast and upcoming speaking engagements. So where can listeners follow along so that they can continue to learn more about regulating themselves and also helping arm their kids with the tools to succeed?
Yeah, amazing. So my website is a great place to start, and it's www.katelundspeaks.com. And so folks can connect with me and get in touch with me there. And also through my new book, Step Away, The Keys to Resilient Parenting, which is up on my website and available and bounds. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, everyone go check her out there as well as on the podcast, get copies of the books. I imagine they would be great book club reads because I think when we're in community, then that's an opportunity, just like we did here on the podcast. We're very intentional on the podcast to not just talk about all the great tips and tricks from the books, but to also say, here's how I learned these because I didn't do things perfectly either, and neither did I. And I think when we share these lessons in community and we start to learn from one another and support each other in different ways, so then when we see our child's buddy on the playground, maybe having a moment, maybe we know, because we've had this conversation, we know how to help, how to show up for that family. That's not always intervening. Sometimes that's saying to your child, come over here, honey. That I know Benny needs a moment, right? Benny just needs a moment. We're going to be good friends for Benny by doing that. So I think taking these lessons, having conversations with the people in our lives and learning how we can show up better in community just takes it to the next step. Thank you so much, Dr. Kate Lund, for being here on the show. You have taught us so much today, and we are so grateful.
Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great.
And thank you so much to our storytellers for being here. We appreciate your time and attention, and let us know on social media or on the website through the contact what you learned from today and how you want us to show up for you in coming episodes. We're so glad you're here. As always, until next time, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Hold on to me and I will try to make it right. Everyone needs something that